I also represent the Yaqui community of South Tucson, where I am a ceremonial leader. And there I do speak for that community um, on issues dealing with indigenous rights, on issues dealing with rights of mobility and passage. And that is something that we have been working with for over a decade. Um, and the Alianza Indígena Sin Frontera first began in 1997. And it was created and organized on the Tohono Nation District Council or District um, uh, community of San Enrier. It's close by here near Tucson. At that time, we invited people from California, from Texas, from New Mexico, from Arizona, people that were interested in dealing with immigrant issues, people that were interested in working with indigenous rights, people that had uh, problems crossing the border, and I'm talking about indigenous people crossing the border, people that were concerned about the immigration policies that were being established at that time, back in 1997. Um, and so the Alianza Indígena Sin Frontera was created, or Indigenous Alliance Without Border, was created to deal with specifically indigenous immigrant issues, if you will. Uh, I know that a lot of us as indigenous people feel that immigration law should not affect us. A lot of us feel that we are indigenous to this community and to this land, and those indigenous people are the primary owners of this, what is called North America, or the Americas. And so therefore we should not be affected by immigration legislation, border policies. But unfortunately, that is something that continues to be an issue in our communities, especially in our efforts to bring in our relatives to visit from Mexico to participate in ceremonies. And so today, the purpose of the Roundtable Symposium is to educate basically people on what's going on with the immigration laws, what's going on in indigenous communities, our concern, and hopefully strategies that we can talk about and maybe develop a plan of action today. A plan of action that may need to be discussed over and over before we implement those actions. We may need to have another roundtable. We may need to have meetings after meetings in order to develop a good strategy in dealing with all this bad legislation, the political climate, the racism that we're faced with. And so we have Kat Rodriguez from Derechos Humanos. We have Julian Rivas, who is a Tohono O'odham from Mexico as well. And we have Sarah Gonzalez, who's the director of the Racism Justice program here at YWCA. And we have Shannon Rivers, who is from Akima O'odham in the Gila River Indian community. So I want to welcome all the panelists here. And the process will be more of a discussion rather than information. It will be a off-the-cuff information between you and I and all of us on some of the issues that we're facing with and dealing with in this community. And we also would like to have participation from you as an audience are here. Want to say something, ask questions, for any of us here, feel free to do so. So I would like to see, maybe we can start with Sarah, since Sarah is the person that's works here in this building. So I'll give her the first privilege to talk about her project and introduce herself. So. Anybody here? Everybody here? Are we speaking loud enough?
Good morning. My name is Sara Gonzalez. I'm the director of the Racial Justice Program here at the YWCA. Within this program, we work with both youth and adults. We believe that youth, yes, are our future, so we want to work with them and learn from them and educate as well. But we know that a lot of adults are teaching them right now too, so we work with adults as well. Working with youth in this climate has been very interesting. We've seen a lot of different trends, a lot of different experiences, and heard a lot of stories from the young people. One of the things that we found is that our population here, there are a lot of families here who have indigenous parents, or one parent is indigenous, also a Latino or Mexican, both documented and undocumented status. So there are a lot of varying issues that affect our youth here. One of the things we're seeing is that youth really take on a lot of burden. So some of the things that maybe the parents are going through with the fear and anxiety of the current climate, just not being able to even travel or being afraid to travel, both in their own car or on the bus. A lot of times the youth will be the ones that will be asked to step up and run those errands or serve as translators, things like that. So we're seeing some medical issues, one of them which is called vicarious trauma, and this means that the youth themselves might not be targeted. Maybe they have documentation status, but their parent doesn't. But any fear or anxiety that their parents are facing, they will feel too, because of the close proximity and because they're seeing it happen. So those are issues called vicarious trauma. And the other one, there's a local doctor in town that we've met with, and he's seen a lot of medical issues that are coming up, some symptoms, and he's trying to write it up, a policy brief, a documentation of this in particular, and he's calling it pre-deportation syndrome. So he's seeing a lot of families come in that have anxiety-related illness, and he starts talking with them, and it's really this anxiety that's brought on by having a family member that was just picked up and deported, or feared themselves for them or their children. So we're seeing that racism, we deal with racism and trying to eliminate racism, and I think it's important for a lot of folks to know and to hear that these have real impacts on our health of our community. It's not just, this is a terrible time, or we'll just power through it, but there are real consequences for racism in our community, which we know it's historical. But right now, with the legislation and the government and a lot of the xenophobia that's going on, we're just seeing a lot more of it, and seeing a lot more of it in our young people. For a lot of them, it's the first time they've maybe experienced a lot of the overt racism. Standing at protests, a lot of our youth have really stepped up and organized the protests that have gone on. But they've also experienced new things that they hadn't before, because they hadn't necessarily been in that environment. So we're talking about youth feeling empowered and standing on the street corners with signs and community, but they're experiencing people driving by and flipping them off, or spitting on them, or yelling cuss words or racial slurs. And for a lot of them, it's the first time they've experienced that, and in such mass. So the volume of it is much more. So we're seeing a lot of youth kind of dealing with that and trying to figure out how to process all that information. So a program that we started recently here is called Nuestra Voz, Our Voice, and it's to deal with those issues. There are other really great groups in town, like Tierra y Libertad, who are working with youth and their families about what to do if the police show up, or not to come out. You don't have to come out of your house. You don't have to answer the door. They're working for those basic needs. There's groups like that. So what our group does is to really educate youth on outlets for all that emotion that's coming out, where to put the frustration, or where to put the feeling that we want to address something. So that's what we do with our programs. Some of that is art. We had a summer camp held here this past summer, when a lot of that legislation, SB 1070, was just really hitting hard. And so we had about 45 to 50 youth from all over Pima County that came through, and we talked about the issues, asked them what they thought about it. is there something wrong with it? Why do you think there's something wrong with it? Actually being in dialogue with them so they could formulate their own thoughts about the issues and how it impacts them. And then simultaneously, we're teaching them art forms. These are ways to get a lot of this emotion out, so we can get it out and see what it is and start breaking it down. Because a lot of youth and a lot of adults too can build up and sort of stay with you. So they did that. They did different art forms: photography, graffiti, video, recycled sculptures, all of that. It became a tool for them to see, this is how I can process some of the information that I'm feeling here. And then at the end of that camp, we had invited the community, and we had some political leaders that came as well. And it's part of our program to provide a platform for youth to be heard. So those politicians came out, Raul Grijalva came out as well, and listened to what they had to say. So that was really important. Also, a couple of weeks ago, we just finished up with the Latino Youth Leadership Summit, and that was 270 middle school and high school students that came here, and again, similar issues, getting them to articulate what they're feeling. So we had debates on all the propositions, take a pro and a con side, and this is the art of debate. This is how you can have these conversations with folks, without it necessarily blowing up or actually getting some factual information going. So it was really something that most of them had never participated in before. That, and then, another art form being slam poetry, which is really something a lot of the youth today, it resonates with them because it's born out of emotion. It's not sort of a sterile sort of poetry that a lot of them have been shown in their schools. So the stuff that came out of that was really amazing. And we did evaluations with the youth pre and post to see, what kind of change happened. And most of them, the numbers just jumped to say, like, I believe as a young person I have something important to say. Those numbers jumped once they're given that opportunity to have their voices heard. I believe I would attend a protest, or I would speak up for something that I believed in. Those numbers jumped. So those are the kinds of programs that we hope to are making a change for our youth today. One, you have the existing circumstances, you have the existing condition of legislation, the media, personal experiences. All of that is very, very heavy, I believe, right now. And our youth, it's our job to really provide some outlets for them to use their voice. And that voice also is not just for them to heal and see some of that historical trauma kind of come out, but also for the community to hear them. And there's a lot of power, as we've seen, in the youth voice. The other thing I will add is that I've actually seen a lot of positive things come out, and I don't believe that some of our politicians expected that. I believe they expected people to lay down and just sort of go to the wayside, and that they had a lot of power to drown us out. But I've seen the opposite in the young people. I've been doing this job for 7 years, and so I've seen some of the similar programs that I've done in years past. The youth will be like, oh, okay, I never thought of myself as an activist, or I don't really know what to say. I don't think that youth can really address racism or hate crimes or bullying. People have driven by and yelled, go back to Mexico, or, those kinds of things. Thanksgiving in our schools is you'll still see school children running around with paper headdresses, all those things that are happening. And now this year that I've done some of those similar programs, going out to the schools, I'll say something like, okay, everyone get together and find 5 things you have in common. And I'll say, okay, what is this group? We're all activists. We're literally shocked because it never had happened before. So they've seen that you cannot replace sort of this real life experience. You can talk to them about it and say like, oh yeah, your voice is important, but they've actually experienced that. And it's been the families too that have been really strong in doing that, I asked them, why do you believe you're an activist? I said, well, our families brought us to the protests this summer. I'm like, okay. So, it's a real lived experience that they're getting. And so, a lot, like we said before, a lot of the protests were organized by young people, and I've been to many of the protests, and there's people of all ages supporting that. So as the adults, we're supporting our young people, and I think that's been positive for them to see, like, okay, yes, I can do this, and my voice is important. So there have been some positive things to come out of it. I'm just concerned for the long term. I'm concerned about burnout. I'm concerned that, a lot of that was in the summer and there was a little bit more free time for them. And now they're in school. We work with middle school, high school, and college students. So the extra burden of school and being in an environment like that where it's not always supportive, or you might be the only one in your classroom, especially in college, who is a brown person, we're seeing that now. Stress of finals, things that are going on in their own families, that ebbs and flows, death in the family or just conflict, all those things are now piling on. So it's our concern for longevity. How do we maintain our young people going through all this stuff with the added pressure of the things that they typically deal with? So I'm encouraged by their response, and I'm encouraged by the programming that we do that's led by young people themselves. So it's kind of a plus and minus, trying to always balance that. We need to get them through school and help them maintain, but they also feel like they need to be doing something about it, or they feel like it's there's like a really big sense of responsibility for the young people. So it's been a very interesting time, and it's very challenging at times to hear stories of, a young person just coming home and their parent telling them, "Oh, I'm sorry, your father was picked up today," and then it's not just they were picked up and now they're back in Mexico. It's like a long-term. They're in a detention center. We don't know what's happening. There's just a lot of little kids. We got to take care of them, and there's just so much that goes on. And I hope that folks in this area, of course, and outside of this area, really understand that racism and the impact of these things on people there are real consequences to it. But we're fighting it, and young people are really strong and really pulling through with it. So we have lots of examples. If anyone in the community is interested in our programs, they continue on, and we saving all of the art and videotaping all of the things that they're participating in, and seeing how we can showcase that in the community. So that's sort of what we've been up to.
Any questions, or we're just having a discussion?
Any questions for Sarah?
Yes.
Your website and contact information.
Okay, yes. The website is www.ywcatucson.org. And my name is Sara Gonzalez. I'm the director. And you can call 520-884-7810, extension 107.
Any questions? Any more questions? Any comments from the audience?
You can contact me and I'll get you the information. It's really new right now. Like I said, working with a local doctor who on his own is like, okay, this is something that's, happened in his own family and in a lot of his patients that he's seen. So he's in the process of writing it up and trying to get it like a recognized diagnosis. He's working within the medical system to try to get that, because that's going to have a huge impact, even politically. So if we can say, okay, there is this diagnosable condition called pre-deportation syndrome, then politically we can say these laws are really negative for our community. They're actually causing illness and sickness, and this is going to cause money, all these kinds of things that are wrapped up in it. So that's, a reason why it's important for that diagnosis to pull through. So you can contact me and I can get you information, although there really is just little information right now about it.
Is there a peak in anxiety disorder?
What's that?
Is there a peak in anxiety disorder?
Yeah. And it's most related to like agoraphobia, fear of leaving the house. There's a lot of those symptoms because people are just afraid to even get out. We also run different programs for women around domestic violence, and we've had a number of women drop out and say we can't participate in the program anymore, just afraid to even take the bus because we have undocumented status. So those are the things that we're experiencing even in social services realm.
It's good, chaotic. My name is Shannon Rivers. I'm Akamir Autumn from the Heel River Indian community. I want to talk a little bit. I was asked to come and express a little bit about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and its importance to indigenous peoples, specifically along the borders. But first, I need to express that I am not part of the government, the tribal government at Gila River. I think we all have to kind of acknowledge that once in a while. I am a couple of things at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. For the last couple of years, I've been elected as the Global Indigenous Peoples Caucus co-chair, one of the 7 co-chairs that represents the 7 regions of the world. Was nominated to represent the United States at the Permanent Forum or the Global Caucus Forum at the UN that takes place yearly in New York. There's a lot of stuff to cover. I know that there's been a lot of interest within what's been going on with the declaration lately. There's been a lot of movements that certain governments have been making. In 2007, just a brief history, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There were 143 that adopted the Declaration. 4 countries did not adopt the Declaration: United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Since that time, and as recently as a few days ago, Canada was out of this part of the world was one of the 2 holdouts. Canada just adopted the Declaration. However, there was questions, and I don't have the specific press release, but what has happened is Canada has moved forward to expressing their support for the Declaration. However, they maintain that they have jurisdiction. They have the indigenous communities within the Canada's boundaries still are subject to the laws of Canada. So that brings into question the rights of self-determination. It brings in the question on the rights of economic development. Brings in the question the rights of trade or free trade. It also brings in question the right to free, prior, and informed consent. There are many issues that cover the Declaration in the articles in the Declaration, and I'll get to a couple of them specifically here in a few minutes. So as of today, the United States has still not endorsed the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They still maintain their position as of this week at the National Congress of American Indians held in their annual meeting held in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I believe Kimberly Teehee, she is the Domestic Policies Affairs Administrator or Ambassador. I'm not sure of her specific title. She had stated at the National Congress that the United States is still reviewing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So we have not here in the United States, we have not moved forward in signing or adopting the declarations of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So there's still a lot of questions on why the United States does not endorse the declaration. We're afraid that what they may do is endorse the declaration but do the same thing as Canada did. That means that there's still jurisdictions that the indigenous communities within the United States, the boundaries of the United States, are still under their laws that dictate to indigenous nations. So there's a lot of questions to be asked, a lot of questions to be answered, and we're still in that process of trying to get the United States to sign on the Declaration. The Declaration is a non-legal binding document. What that means is that it has really no legal teeth. However, there are many policies that the United States have that the Native American Religious Freedom Act, the NAGPRA, Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, that are still impacting and still struggle today. Native communities still struggle today to act upon and to get support from the United States regarding some of those laws and those policies that were signed by the government and passed on to indigenous communities. We still have issues. Specifically, let's talk about NAGPRA. The Native American Graves and Repatriation Act was established. However, we still have indigenous funerary items. We still have sacred medicine bundles. We still have artifacts that are of extreme cultural and spiritual significance to indigenous communities within the United States, and most tribes believe that those items must and should be returned to them. There are museums throughout this country, and not only in this country but throughout the world, that at a time when vandalism, theft, and outright taking of these items from indigenous communities, there was no laws in protection of these native communities and these medicine people and these bundles and these sacred items. So we have them remaining in museums throughout this country and throughout the world. NAGPRA has yet to be really fully be enforced within this country. So if you have items that are very sacred to Native communities and have not been returned, we need those items returned for the health and the benefit and the sacredness of what they are to our communities. We believe there are many Native communities that believe that these items that are still out there can assist and help and with the Native communities that are suffering from a spiritual, cultural connection that is missing because of these bundles and because of these sacred items. The issues of the returning of human remains is still very high on the priority of traditional people, that they need to be returned and be placed back in the ground in a burial, in a ceremonial way, in a proper way, and that is still a struggle within Native communities. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about, and I won't be too much longer, but the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples again was adopted in 2007. I have a copy of it here. I suggest before we move forward that, and I don't just mean in this meeting, but I suggest that you read the articles in its entirety, because it impacts the right to self-determination, cultural, traditional issues, border issues, economic development issues. It addresses these concerns within Native communities. There are an estimate. The United States says there's 562 federally recognized tribes within the United States, and that number may be one or two less, but nevertheless, there are some tribes, indigenous communities, that are not recognized by the federal government. They are not recognized by their states. There are tribes that still exist today and still call for that recognition. Um, and for whatever reasons they want to be recognized by the United States government, that would be up to them to tell you what those reasons are. Um, Getting back to the federally recognized tribes, that there's still high levels of poverty, there's still high levels of violence. It was mentioned, native upon native violence, domestic violence, substance abuse, alcohol and drugs, trafficking, specifically here in this area in what is known as the state of Arizona. So, as I mentioned earlier, many traditional people believe that if these items, along with the recognition of true self-determination and sovereignty, were enacted upon, that this may be a process of healing toward some of these communities. I want to express a little bit about the United Nations Declaration. Specifically, since we're down here in Arizona, Article 36 has came up numerous times here during these discussions. And the Article 36 within the Declaration states that indigenous peoples, in particular those divided by international borders, have the right to maintain and develop contacts, relations, and cooperations, including activities of spiritual, cultural, political, economic, and social purposes with their own members as well as other peoples across the border. States, in consultation with cooperation with indigenous peoples, shall take effective measures to facilitate the exercise and ensure the implementation of this right. You have not seen that. Since 2000, since 9/11, and the Department of Homeland Security and its enacting of laws and certain policies, WITI, Western Hemispheric Travel Initiative, specifically the Real ID Act that gives Homeland Security and Janet Napolitano the right to waive all types of federal, state, and tribal laws. They are continuing at this moment to erect a wall that not only impacts indigenous peoples, but the environment and the relationships between all the plants and the animals that grow in and around that area. So if a wall is erected and a barrier is in place, the question is, how does that impact indigenous peoples? Well, indigenous peoples practice traditional ceremonies, and part of those traditional ceremonies are the gathering of plants, maybe the ceremonial practices of medicinal purposes. So it hinders and impacts the traditional ceremonies, and I use the word traditional lightly because these are ceremonies that have been with indigenous communities since the times of the creation stories. So if it hinders that in any way, I believe, this is my opinion, that it is a form of genocide, that it is reducing those that do not have that ability to cross that border or to gather or to participate in ceremonies. Jose Matus just mentioned that there's trouble with crossing the border because maybe individuals don't have the right ID. They don't have the certain papers that they needed. There has been a number of stories coming out from the Tono O'odham, the Cocopa, the Yaqui, the Apache people that there are individuals, relatives, and elders that do not have these particular IDs that are needed to cross the border or the right documentation. So if we look at the article in Article 36, it says that indigenous peoples have the right to maintain those cultural and spiritual connections. How do we as a nation, as a community of indigenous people feel about that? And that is, again, a form of genocide. It's a slow progression. It's like anything to how to steal Indian identity and how to remove the Native American or the so-called Indian out of the kill the Indian, save the man. It's the same concept. We continue with that, and it's just enacted in policies that are racist, that are killing and slowly killing Native communities. So there are many problems that Native people face, and that has been going on since the arrival of the Spaniards and the Europeans. I guess I could go on and talk more about stuff, but I guess part of one of the concerns that were brought out sometimes back is what are we as Native people, as indigenous people, doing about it? This is an important issue. There's not enough participation by Native people, and there should be. We look at the governments that are in place, the tribal governments that are in place, and this is a thorny subject to many, many people. There has to be a recognition of traditional protocols. And by that I mean that the governments within the tribal system, the tribal government system, have to recognize traditional protocol of our mamakai, our medicine people. There has to be an acknowledgement, and even to the point that there has to be a stance on what is right for the sustainability of indigenous people. And that means that indigenous people must and should be able to maintain their cultural and traditional practices. We see that there are estimates that within 2050, the indigenous languages throughout the world, over 50 to 70% of them will have disappeared. We must have schools and universities that educate our indigenous children, our indigenous youth, our Native youth in ways of cultural and traditional practices. There must be a huge emphasis on bringing those that know the knowledge, have the knowledge, to share daily language and cultural classes or educational practices within the communities of these native communities. So there's many things again to discuss. I also want to just mention real briefly that in 2008, the Gila River Indian community was one of the first federally recognized tribes to sign a resolution affirming the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They are one of the only tribes to do that, along with Salt River Indian community, which are both located near the metropolitan Phoenix area. But they are the only tribes to do that. We know that other nations, other small community grassroots organizations have attempted to adopt it and move forward on this declaration. We also know that there's been pressure on the Obama administration to sign the declaration. I was just on the phone with someone who participated at the National Congress of American Indians. They said that over 45 to 60% of people, when discussing an issue, brought up the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Some say, well, it's a non-binding document. However, we believe that it's one of just another arrow in your quiver to use to help and support the rights of indigenous peoples. Its articles are important. They are drafted by indigenous peoples. They specifically address many of the issues that I just talked about. Last year's session was about economic development. There has to be a recognition of economic development that is traditional and sustainable to indigenous communities. We cannot keep building large megaplexes, whether they're casinos or whatever they are. I don't believe in these current economic times is proof that we can't see the future on what's going to happen with this U.S. Economy. But what we can do is create sustainable developments within indigenous communities and their territories that look to the future of our children and 7 generations to come. And whether it's agriculture, whether it's doing something extraordinary for environmental purposes, we have to look differently at what we're doing as indigenous communities. So I think I'm going to end there. If there's any questions, we can talk about them, but thank you so much for having me.
Shannon, I do have a question on the declaration. If the declaration is not binding, how can indigenous communities use that in order to protect our indigenous rights? And everything should be based on domestic law and American Indian law. And how does that, how will the declaration help in that process?
I think the question that nations, that indigenous communities have to ask themselves is, how far do you push the envelope of sovereignty? How far will you push that? For example, there are many nations that still today, even in my community, suffer high levels of poverty. So if it's non-binding and the United States says, oh, we're going to sign it, however, there's no real legitimacy to it. The tribes then have to say, well, we are considered a sovereign nation and we want to have a trade agreement with, I don't know, Canada, indigenous people in Canada or indigenous people in Mexico. We want to bring up coffee. We want to trade. We want to sell our cotton to them. We want to create a sustainable economic lifestyle that's going to remain within our community and create positive long outcomes for the community. I think the key issue, though, again, is sovereignty, the expression of sovereignty. Right now, we have limited sovereignty. And that comes down to, how far do you want to push that envelope? How far are you going to push it? If there's sacred sites, if there's roads going through your community, if there's development that you disagree with that shouldn't be there, if there's, we know that a lot of issues within Native communities here in the Southwest are mining issues, water rights issues. How far are you going to push that sovereignty? I think that it depends on that nation, how far they want to do it. And remember, each nation is an individual nation. They determine their rights. They determine their relationship with the United States. They determine their ideas of economic development. They determine their levels of sovereignty. So, however, as I mentioned, the importance to remain culturally sustained is there are times you're going to have to push that envelope to where sacred sites, cultural rights, religious freedom rights are important, and you have to push that envelope. And it scares some people, I believe, because colonization is so thick and deep within our communities that some of us want to remain, keep things as they are. And colonization is another big thing that we haven't discussed, and the mind of how it works and how we've been colonized as Native people, being sent to boarding schools and asked to go to these universities, but not come home and create a real environment for the communities. So I would argue that it's about sovereignty and the expression of sovereignty.
But the sovereignty issue will have to be dealt with the tribal governments. Is that correct? Or because and where I'm going is that we have two worlds, if you will. One, you have the indigenous urban community world, and then you have the reservation world, which has their own governments and all that. As an indigenous person from an urban area, do we have to rely on our government to give us that sovereignty, or can a community of indigenous people in the urban area, for example, the Tucson area, because there's some Matam here, there's some Yaquis, there's Apaches, there are whole United Nations of indigenous communities here. But if we can come together as one, if you will, with the declaration help us in that regard.
Well, again, it's up to the communities. It's up to the nations. For example, the United States government established these tribal governments as a way to deal with them on their level. So let's say if grassroots, and that's kind of what we're grassroots. But let's say that a grassroots organization came up and said, I want to remove this tribal government and have in place a traditional government. And one of the examples that I can use is the people of the Longhouse. They still maintain their traditional government and ways of governing. We have in the United States moved toward the direction that the United States has pushed us in. So, and this is not a revolutionary thought. This is something that has been thought about for generations. In fact, when the tribal governments were starting to be established, there's an old thing that when if you had cattle back in the late 1800s, you were automatically, maybe not automatically, but you were considered to be financially secure, and that would put you on a tribal council or on a council in the 18 and 1900s. So that is somebody else's way of saying you're legitimized. You went to the University of Arizona. You went to U of A. You're an attorney. What about having a traditional council that maintains a tradition that, in a way that can deal with the U.S. government under this recognition of sovereignty? You would have to change that whole process. You would have to change that whole tribal government process. And many Native people still talk about that today, because what you see thus far has not really helped, has it? I mean, that's a question that I bring to you. Has it helped? We're still having issues with sovereignty, water rights, natural resources. We're still having many issues. Has it helped? And another thorny subject is the churches that impacted our community, that still to some day take that cultural and religious aspect of our communities and slowly remove that knowledge of tradition and culture. So you would have to revamp the whole situation, the whole government system, and how you deal with other nations, because as a sovereign nation, you should be dealing with other sovereign nations, United States government to indigenous nations, not state level. That's under, I would imagine that's under you, under the legal terms of indigenous nations. So, yeah, you again, the grassroots folks would have to step up and say, we don't want this. This has not helped. You're negotiating our rights away. You're taking all our natural resources. You're impacting our environment. We still have high levels of poverty, drug addiction, violence, whatever. How do we as grassroots, traditional folks, however you want to label it, change all that? And that's going to be the discussion, the debate, the action that needs to be taken. And it won't happen in my lifetime, I don't think. But it should happen, because that's cultural sustainability. Can you do it under this current system? Maybe. But so far, we have lost quite a bit. I mean, this land here, Tucson, Autumn land, Phoenix, Autumn land, natural resources, water, gold. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, it's not a pretty list, but it's continuation.
Any questions for Shannon on this Declaration of Indigenous Rights? Well, one of the things that I also want to share. Yes.
When Sitting Bull and Geronimo and Cochise was on the scene, they had a connection with the ancestors. Their focus and movement as individuals was upright, to honor justice, to honor truth, to maintain a connection with the ancestors and the Great Spirit by bowing down. That instilled in those who witnessed them a sense of encouragement to pursue and to try to assimilate the stature that they themselves represented, which rooted itself in an allegiance to themselves, an allegiance to themselves that gave them an eventual position of authority. As small as ants are in the creation, they represent an authority because they reconcile and witness within themselves that they have given birth to each other under the auspices of allegiance that no one gave to them but the Great Spirit that put it inside of them when they were brought into existence. Every species on the planet have that same authority and force operating within them, but it has become disconnected through the planetary cycles, through the colonizations and things of that manner. Right now on the planet, predominantly, there are only two people who observe and honor an allegiance unto themselves. And they are the only two people that reign as an authority for the most part on the earth. That's the Caucasian that has established an allegiance unto themselves under the auspices of a white God. And all the tribes in the white world can identify that the white boy on the cross looked like them. And under that vibration, they honor and esteem and allegiance to themselves. From that, they have established a position of authority. The only other people that has established that same position is China. When we as indigenous people go back to our root and uphold and honor our relationship to the Great Spirit by bowing down, whatever term you like to use, to reconnect ourselves within ourselves to that phenomena. And realize that individuals impact on groups. If one individual is strong enough to stand up and to proclaim truth and justice and is willing to die for that, we all are born from women. And if we're born from women, we go die. So if we can accept that we're going to die naturally, then we can take a position that we're going to die standing up for what's right and what's true and what's just. But if we bow down and connect with the life source, we will have force and encouragement and strength and vitality to stand before our foes and proclaim what we know to be correct. So that's all we got to say. Thanks. Here you go.
Thank you. Well, and I agree. I think that, you know, people have to, again, it's standing the front line. You have to stand the front line. And there are people in this room that stand the front line, and sometimes they do it as individuals. But if we truly want to try to break this barrier that we see, you got to question the laws that are in place. Who are these people that can give you these laws, that put these laws out there? You know, do they have authority? Do they have the authority to tell you what to do? I mean, and I'm not saying to, you know, if you want to go start a revolution, then start it. But the revolution, I think, is within yourself, that you have to maintain that cultural, traditional practice, whether small or big. You have to maintain it. And again, there are people in this room that maintain that, and they are ostracized, they are neglected, they are spoke down on, they are ridiculed. So, and I'm just one guy, you know, I'm just one person. So if I look back and there's nobody behind me, I can't stop. I got to keep going. And it's tough, I think, when you look at our elders that really felt that colonization just sweeping in and taking over, and the destruction of it, and the sadness that was generated from that, the impact that it's had on Native people. It's had an impact on me. It's had an impact on brothers and sisters that I know, and they're still impacted by it. And what our sister was saying, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder didn't start in World War II. It started with indigenous wars, the relocation and the movement of indigenous people. Everybody that is European, African, Asian, you're all immigrants. They're all immigrants. We all migrated to some degree. And now you got laws telling this, you know, the xenophobia, the fear, and the fear of immigrants that is taking place. That is just shocking to me. But it's not that shocking if you know the history of the United States. And you know the history of colonization that started in Africa, that started with the Romans, that started with, you know, the Europeans. Wherever it was, it's that progression of colonization that minimizes and depletes cultural and traditional knowledge within, and I can only speak within this territory. But if you know the history, that has taken place. The Declaration, I think, is one of the most important documents within the last 20, 30 years to talk about the rights of indigenous peoples. And we've seen it in the 60s with the American Indian movement. We've seen it when people have died. We've seen it with Descahe when he went to the League of Nations. You know, to fight for the rights of indigenous peoples. these children and these families that are suffering from this anxiety because they're afraid, because somebody else is putting fear in them, because they're going to separate their families. Can you imagine? I can't imagine that. But it happened to Native people, boarding schools, relocation. It happened. And to some degree, it's still happening today. Maybe not on that scale, but it's happening. So if you go to the Tono Autumn, it's happening. The wall wants to go up because there's terrorists that are coming in. I don't know. Over 60%, 70% of those people that are crossing the border are looking for jobs. They're looking for family. They're looking for sustainability, how to maintain just to feed their family. And those very small percentage of those that are violent, those that are hurting people, right, they don't need to be here. But those that are crossing, those that are coming, those that have that right to do that, as indigenous people, we should acknowledge that and recognize that. We should have that. And I've been on this mic for a long time, so I'm going to move it over.
For barbecue mounts. That means protector overseeing the sacred area in barbecue mounts. My other spokesman right here is Dennis Manuel. And I, for one, is one of them that was sent to boarding school without even as to having my parents having anything to say about it. So I was sent to boarding school, and that's where I finished right there. And that's why right now I'm so, welcome to the Autumn Territory, everybody that's here. And I'd like to say that I hated the government system all the way. And I'm still fighting for it now. Even our tribal government system. What they're trying to do in that area, what I'm talking about, Babakiri sacred areas, they're trying to develop in that area. So right now I've been going around telling the people what's happening down there, what they're trying to do, destroy that sacred area. And that area means a lot to not only to the people, the grassroots people, but to the medicine people that knows what's there. And I, for myself, been fighting the tribal government system for maybe 40 years, 30 years now. But it's the family that's been living there since time immemorial. And why the tribal government wants to take it away, I don't know. They won't be out of the way. They've been trying to ask me for a land assignment, and I said no. I have all my papers here, my document. So where's your papers? It's in Washington, Albuquerque, San Francisco. They mention all these cities. So far, I haven't seen anything. But they're still trying to come back, still talking about development. That's why I hate the government system. Whether it's a U.S. government or a tribal government system. The only time, and they've never came up and asked me anything or get permission to do anything, man. They just go ahead and do it, man, without asking me. And that's really bothers me. I could use stronger words than that. But as me and my friend right here, Dennis, we went all over to the rest, talking to grassroots people. And they all said, no, don't let them develop in that area. And all the medicine people said the same thing too. Don't let them develop in there. You'll be hard. But in the end, things will turn out different. And not too long ago, I put the district into court. And what happened? They threw me in jail. I was the one that, that put in the complaint, but I got thrown in jail. That's just another way of working around it. So, but in the end, I was found not guilty in all charges, and that's because they didn't have any papers. And I feel, well, I feel like I'm out there by myself. Me and Dennis here. We went through a lot, and we're still going through a lot with our tribal government. So whatever they say out there, at least you heard it from me. And it's upsetting, very upsetting. That's because I have my rights, my apatak, my himatak. Those are the two things that, if you know your native background, your himatak, way of life, your apatak, your rights. That's what they're trying to take away from me. And it's a long battle. But I keep moving though. Because I know my ancestors are behind me. I know my ancestors. I can name them from where it began. And a lot of them don't know their ancestors. And that's a shame. And I have a lot of things to say, but those are the main important things that I would like to put out. And not only that, but I'm going to turn the mic over to my spokesman here, Dennis.
Hello, I'm glad to be here today. Glad to see everybody here in support or interested in learning more about what's been going on here on Autumn Lands. It's not like the gentleman mentioned earlier. We look at these boundaries which keep us away from that's part of what's happening out here. Is they set these boundaries where we can't go to our sacred areas, our prayer sites. Because these boundaries don't mean anything to us. They were here, these sacred places were here long before any other kind of people were here, except Native people. And they're still, right here, Mount Lemmon is one of the most sacred mountains with their people. Not only us, but also Apache people. And all surrounding this area, on up to, I think up close to Flagstaff and on south. Even on the other side of the border, there's sites out there. And these boundaries are what they're using against, by saying we don't have a say in what goes on with our sites, using boundaries as leverage to go against or resist against our issues, and dividing our people. And that's what's happening, dividing our people, and it's dividing the natural flow of our habitat. We need to have the seed to our medicine plants that grow out there, and the only way they grow is through the animals, carrying across the borders. And that's important to our people because we have medicine plants on the sacred Mount Babakiri, which stretches from north to south, and it goes into Mexico. They had built an observatory up there on Keep Peak, which was questioned in the late years of who gave them the right of way to build that observatory up there, because that's also considered a sacred, that's part of that sacred mountain, that range. But we've been through, like Ernie says, we've been through a lot of political opposition. against our own people, natives, even people who claim to support sacred sites or support our issues. They in the background turning against us because of money. They want part of that money, whatever feeds into their issue and their goals or whatever. But we're seeing more of that. We're seeing more that even within the groups that we gather like this, there's opposition against us. There's people there that are talking against us in the background, not directly right out, but around our people. Those are lies. They're all based on lies. So if you hear anything that's against our issue about all we're standing for is the protection of the area and against commercialization and development. For we want to protect our medicine, our ancestors who have fought in the history, have fought and died fighting for that area. Our ancestors. Before this, it's in the history books where we've had numerous battles and wars to protect that area, and many perished in those battles, and now we remember our ancestors. We stand for them because there's a reason for those things, a very important reason. We've been hearing it since we were kids. My grandfather, my great-grandfather say, you protect those things. Don't dig in there. Don't be digging artifacts out of there. Don't be bothering the petroglyphs. There's grave sites. There's villages. Those are sacred. Those are sacred. There's a whole sacred area there right at the base of Babakiri there. So we're still standing strong. We'll continue to move wherever we can get support. We've been to the United Nations. We've addressed it there in a permanent forum in 2007? 2003, yeah. So we plan to maybe continue, and if we can do more interventions or more discussions on it, and people in support anywhere, or other tribes. We've been active in supporting other tribes. Up in South Dakota, we went up to stand up for fight for Matopaha, Bear Buttes with the Sioux Nation. We've been up in Klamath, up in Northern California, Chumash Nation, California, and here at San Francisco Peaks. So and South Mountain, Phoenix area. So we've been doing a little traveling when we can, but a lot of it is just on our own. We get support from the 7th generation, which has really been helpful. Before we were all on our own, we didn't have any kind of support. But so now we're getting a little more support on that level, but we still got a lot of more work to do. Especially right now, our council had just got approved to get raises, so now they think they're flexing their muscles to start moving on their plans, previous plans on development, and because they feel they have the number because they voted over on their raises. And how they got it was I don't know what. There's a lot of stories about that, maybe buying all votes or whatever. But now they've won, so they're flexing again. They're starting to move on their plans. And we've had a talk with one of the workers that work from that district, and he kind of gave out the inside information that they have a lot of plans they're working on, and they're gonna go ahead and move on them, regardless of what we say. They're gonna run Ernie right out of his home area. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
My name's everybody's saying is a recap of the 1960s. Because that's, my father has started at that time working in autumn in Mexico. I think I've heard over and over again everything that's been said. Rules and regulations, resolutions that are wrote up from the Autumn tribe in Arizona side it's just has nothing to do with Autumn in Mexico. We have never seen anything done with it. However, that's what we're faced with. But we're talking about border issues. Border issues at this time is getting tougher to cross the border. The requirements are getting stringent, and I believe the Tohono O'odham tribe are giving in to Homeland Security of doing their work because of money, like Mauricio said, because of money. They like that. So everything they've done is for themselves, for under this government, and nothing for the people itself. I don't think they listen to the people anymore. That traditional government that they talk about does not exist anymore. We, however, in Autumn in Mexico, on the Mexico side, we still perform traditional government. When the about three elections ago, when there was a chair lady that went into the cells, destroyed a lot of our I guess our government ways of doing things in Mexico, which they didn't have any right. But they had enough pool because of money in Mexico to change that, to avert us from doing anything else. We have now gotten away from that. We're going to do our own. Again, we've taken over our own cause over there to reestablish our rights, reestablish our holdings. There are some communities that are lost because of the cartels that are in the area. One particular one is located just about 5 miles south of the border, and that place is still under Autumn control, but the cartel still came in and with force took it over. We've always said we're going to take that over by force also. That is still coming. But all of that is going on, and the tribe itself and the Arizona side has not yet done anything for us. When you talk about crossing, I think when they first laid that international line, one of the commissioners had in writing said that Autumn has the right to pass and repass, and that is still in writing. But they seem to sort of not want to follow that or ignore that because of Homeland Security being stringent at this time. They also had, we're also known as terrorists because we crossed back and forth. So it's I don't know how that have come. But last night I came through and I got checked 3 times. Checkpoint 3 times at the border, at the port of entry, 20 miles north, and then when I left the reservation, 3 checkpoints. And they all go there banging on your car, looking at it, walk the dog around your car, and we say we're Tohono O'odham. But that doesn't matter. It's just the color of your skin. this is what the problem is for us. It's a harassment for us, discrimination, and that goes on all the time. In Mexico, going across in Mexico, I feel a whole lot safer in Mexico than here. They do stop, but all the traffic, and they just, as long as you know autumn, they let you go. They just go, keep on going. It's the commercial vehicles that they check on, not the travelers. So that's one of the things that on the border issues that we're concerned with. We're now negotiating, or not negotiating, but having talks with the Mexican authorities while we're doing a reorganization. And one of the things of that one is being recorded as such is because of that there are signees of the I guess those documents from Geneva, and there were signees on that. So, and we also know the United States didn't sign that either. And that's what they're going by. And we're also on the table, we sat at the table with the Sabanistas in Chiapas. And we also do those, they're, pushing the human rights, pushing what they have done, and that we need to get back to know that this is autumn land, autumn property. This is the indigenous, that they are indigenous in Mexico. So that is a lot of things that are going on at this time is impacted by the Homeland Security, that are labeling everybody as terrorists. Yet, the thing that the tribe on this side has not yet stepped up to say anything on our behalf. Yet in their constitution, it says that they will help the autumn wherever they may be in the world, wherever they may be. But they haven't done that. They're quick to destroy something, just like when the lady chairman that was there disrupted and destroyed a lot of things. The people before that, the administration before that, had set up a visa program for the autumn in Mexico that it'd be easier to get across, and they've done it. And now the last two to this date, they're running out of that time, and there's no renewal of any type from the tribe. Nobody's saying nothing with it. But yeah, but to understand the tribe is because they are in the council. The councilman is only concerned with their district. They're not concerned with the rest of the tribe. They're only concerned with their districts. So then nobody's there to say anything about anybody else anywhere. And we've asked time and time again that we have a representative from Autumn in Mexico to be seated, whether it be just a member at large or a liaison between Autumn and Mexico, but they won't have that either. They appoint somebody within the organization and the government in Autumn, but that's about it. It's an appointment. I guess the border issues that are concerning is why they haven't done anything with it. And again, but like I said, again, because of money, they get money for it. I just read the other day on one of their papers that they're complaining, but they only have 47 officers to cover the whole reservation. So they enjoy the Border Patrol being on the reservation, running all over to help them out. But that's the wrong ideology, wrong terminology for that. because at this time also the police enforcements are all outsiders. They're not all of them, so they don't know the Himata, the autumn mentality of how to handle things. They don't know what you think. And you can see that when you go out of your community and start going down the road walking, you may have 2 Border Patrol vehicles surround you. Say, where are you going? What are you doing? It's none of your business. Then you're in trouble. Then they take you away. Where's your right? They don't look at it that way. If you say something bad to them, that you're not a person to be dealt with, you're taken away. You're not a member of the tribe, or I don't know what they think, but it's so small on our behalf, yet it's a large part that's happening. And why are the powers that be not concerned with their own people? And like Mauricio said about the tribal government, is at this time is not doing anything for the autumn. Our sacred sites in Mexico, we have to hang on to that ourselves. As we sit here, they'll be having a meeting somewhere else that we have to just hear about it later on and try to confront or cover that. But we can't be anywhere. We don't have the mechanism. We don't have the office. We don't have no communications. The communication's done by contact. You have to drive over there to talk to the people. That's one of the hard things about it. Through our plight during the 60s and the 70s, that I guess the tribe a little bit more understanding of the older generation had a little bit more understanding of the autumn, that they did develop an office in cells for communications. But they did away with that in 1996. That was closed down. Only because the autumn in Mexico was getting more involved politically, and that would cost them money. So instead of going that way, they shut it down. So there is per se no communication with any form of government in autumn in Mexico. So our situation got worse because of that. Right now, there's nothing, no information coming out of for us. And I think they still have communications in Mexico City. Once in a while, I hear that they sent somebody to Mexico City on behalf of the autumn in Mexico. But we've never know who it is, or never heard a report, or never seen anything. I don't know what. So this is the thing that we're up against in our communities in northern Sonora. In talking about the visas that had expired, a lot of the people that have come across to go to the hospitals for medicine or to be taken care of has declined and dropped out. And when that first started, immediately some passed on because of they have the medicine. And it just got tighter and tighter. Right now, the only way they get across is go to a port of entry and wait for the tribal vehicle to pick them up there. The people that don't have a way of going, and that's very hard because they get questioned on that side. Sometimes they don't even let them through. Yet they have autumn ID that was issued by the tribe. So a lot of the border issues that are are tighter, getting tighter. They have already put steel gates on our reservation routes going through into our communities in Mexico. That looks like they're going to shut it down pretty soon. So in the people that that has came across, the O'odham people that came across, don't want to go back to their communities now because of the hardship of traveling, because of that ends of harassment. So they're staying, and because of all of that, in ways of getting maybe some to go back, because on the other hand, because of the Mexican government, to get anything done with the Mexican government, you have to have people. So a lot of the communities that all the people on this side on the reservation are not counted in Mexico. That means in time they're going to lose their properties, because they're all already mapped out on parcels. As soon as that's the Mexican rule, is you own land by occupation. So that's how they go. If you don't live in your house for a year and somebody comes in and moves in and stays in 5 years it's theirs, not yours anymore. That's a squatter's right that they still have in that area. But all this is going on, and why there is no concern from the tribe. I know the Kickapoos in Mexico, the Kickapoos in the United States, they actually paid for their land. So now they're landowners. Now nobody bothers them. The Cocopas is the same situation. Yet they're smaller tribes, smaller entities. The territory for the O'odham tribe in Mexico is comparable to the territory on this side. How come they don't look at it in that way to take care of their territories? Are they just going to let it go? So that is what we're faced with, is non-recognition of our own tribe to help us out. We're doing all we can with the Mexican government on our own, with no support from the tribe. In fact, I think they're standing against it also. But see, for no reason, they have nothing there. Yesterday we had a meeting in Caborca. I was there in Caborca last night, came back last night. That was concerning our reorganization, and that's meetings coming up also. Our representative to the council in Mexico City came back 4 days ago with the papers in hand that we need to complete them, some of them, because that's continuous, that paperwork. We may have completed one paperwork. As soon as a new government comes in, they take it, throw it in the trash can, we start all over again. Until you pay for your land, they will not bother you anymore. You're a landowner now, so you don't come up in the discussion. And the tribe knows that. We told them that they could do that. Yet they continue to give themselves bonuses and raises and continue to spend a lot of money traveling, a lot of money to different places that I know that, they could have done it at home. But see, those are things that I know what Ernie was talking about. All of the people that the elders that are on that side, none of them have paper or birth certificates, and they welcome the idea of the Western Initiative to have your ID. Well, I know what they do. They put an electronic buzz on it or something that they use that for your passport all the time. And then I haven't heard anything about it. I asked them, and they keep saying somebody's in Washington's on top of it. I don't think so. The other day I heard that they have through the grapevine that I believe the Canadian tribes got that. And I think even the Kokopus and the Kikapus, did they? You know?
I don't know.
So, and they use that. But the insider in themselves said they already have it. It's just that they're not going to give it to anybody. They give it to themselves. So I don't know. But that's the whole thing that we're against in the area for, and it continues on for the border issues are just getting tighter. We have a lot of land, a lot of the sacred sites that we have. We have ceremonies on the other side all the time that are there yearly, and it's getting harder. Last year, a few people went across because of that problem. And to top it off, the cartel are getting violent, getting closer. They're staying further south, but they're getting closer. So all of this is, we're living in as a community members in Northern Sonora. Those are the things that we face with, and yet, like I said, I go to some of these meetings that they sit there and they do all this strategizing, talking, and hopefully something come out of it that'll be helpful. Sometimes we do fundraisers ourselves here for that purpose because, like I said, we don't have the support of anybody financially. So those are the things that goes on, and you talk about grassroots. I guess that's where I come from. Mm-hmm. But I've seen all of the entities of the government, Mexico and United States, and the tribe that are supposedly on doing something for their people. They have not done nothing for all of them in Mexico. This administration talks about, the new administration that's there talks about it. That's all it is. They have it on their administrative plan, and that's all it is. They have yet to perform anything. So, but that's what happens in our case as community members, as crossing the border all the time to go to the community and back, or do business for the South. That's all I have. Thank you.
My name is Jake Elkins. I'm Jake Elkins, and my question, two questions. One is, in what way have the cartels in Mexico impacted Native people in northern Mexico, and how have you reacted to that? And the other question is development. Have you had development issues in your land use in your area, and how has government and the people reacted to that?
On the question of the cartels, it scared the people. Again, we were not really concerned with it because of the protection from the Mexican authorities. However, they got overwhelmed now, and so the people are getting afraid to travel at all in that area. And again, like I said, they have already took over one of our communities, and they sort of did that by force. The roads, I think there's 3 roads coming through in that area that they use all the time. So it's very dangerous at night to travel. So the impact on that is the people are not willing to go back because of being scared. They get afraid to go back to their homes. And the development, we call it encroachment, because they come in and help themselves and start doing that. And like I said, because of limited people there, there's nobody that can do anything. In about 3 or 4 years ago, they were going to put a waste dump in close to one of our sacred sites. That we really fought for it, and we got it. The whole community and the communities surrounding that we kicked it out. We have them not do it. So that was one of our major things that we've done in that area because of that waste dump that they were trying to put in. And the years before that was a gold mine also right there by the sacred site that we closed down too because of contamination. So those are the 2 main things that have been done in that area. And it's ongoing. If you don't keep an eye on it, it'll creep up on you all the time. I tore down a shack in one of the end of our areas because of somebody trying to dig a gold mine, and I understand there was a Caucasian living in Mexico on the Mexico side that they were going up there to explore for gold on our land. I went over there and knocked everything down, closed it up. Yes.
Net, I think Article 66 or 68 or 69 of NAFTA gives corporations the right to extract resources from their land in Mexico as well as here. And there has been a history of corporations getting pretty far along in waste dumps, etc., because of the strength of NAFTA overriding the Mexican government. And sometimes it was only at the village level that local people just would refuse them a little permit or something small to throw a big wrench in their way. Has the people in your area become aware of that level of litigation up and down between the Mexican government and the corporations and the laws that would help control that?
Yes, we do have internet access to all of that. And we do have people in Mexico City that are watchdogs over that. We have contacts that would let us know also. We have a lawyer that is we work with Apaches that has a brother that's a lawyer in Mexico City that knows right in the middle of all those things. So he lets us know when there's something coming up. You know, when they were talking about casinos on that side in Puerto Peñasco, it was one of the things that a lot of them people didn't like it, and it would disrupt a lot of things because our sacred site along the coast, and yet they're still developing. You know, those things came out of Mexico, but yes, we're aware of those. We're, like I said, we're not asleep. But there's a lot of things that are maybe still coming that we don't see it. Yeah, so yes.
So, my own sense of responsibility makes me feel obligated to make a statement at the risk of sounding like a young, naive idealist. But I think that there's a little bit of silence around the issue, so I'm going to say it anyway. My colonized name is Ana. I come from, my ethnic background and my ancestry resides in the land commonly and now currently known as Venezuela and Colombia, which is also alongside a border. And we also have some really beautiful laws, newer laws on the books that are supposed to be protecting indigenous communities in Venezuela, and that also have absolutely no teeth, as well as, I'm sure everyone here being familiar with all over Central America and South America, the UN, International Labor Organization's 169, also being one of the most broken and least enforced international laws and more abused and violated international law. So I just want to throw out there, in Venezuela there is a lot of resistance, and I think that some folks up in the panel mentioned the word terrorism, and I just wanted to throw out there that resistance comes in many forms, and all forms of resistance is usually antagonized and termed terrorism pretty quickly. It has been so by the powers that be on an international level for a few centuries now. And as far as I know, at least in Venezuela and the indigenous struggles that I'm familiar with, in terms of development and consent for different projects and sovereignty in the face of multinational corporations and that type of situation, I know that some of the only places that I know where people have been able to have a successful affirmation of their sovereignty have been places where there has been armed struggle, and places where if they've tried to build a free trade road, indigenous people have repeatedly set trucks on fire until they just give up on the project. And same thing with the energy industry's attempts at putting power lines and placing infrastructure on indigenous land all over Venezuela in order to bring industry to Brazil, and them also having years of struggle where they've been tearing down industrial private property. And so I just want to throw out there that I think that every tool in the toolbox is a beautiful thing when it comes to resistance, and that I think that all resistance is more effective the more that all tools in the toolbox are used. Thank you.
Mexico, the Autumn lands, are they governed by the tribe down in Cells, or do you have your own government? And are they honored by Mexico? Do they?
Yeah. There's 9 communities listed that we have our own representative, and they call them the traditional Autumn leaders. We do our own government. The tribe has no power past that line that they established themselves. But they, as far as that, because of that, we have our own sources that we do, and then we communicate with the Mexican government. They have different also rules and regulations that govern the country that we have to work with and work however to compromise with the Autumn way of life, to compromise with our land issues in the area. But there's I think out of the 9 communities, 6 of them are what they're just communities without title. They're there by possession only. If they was to migrate somewhere else, they lose that. But the rest of the other ones that got a land title from Mexico, that I do have a title for that land. That by community consensus, you can do anything you want with the land. But it takes a whole community to make that consensus, whether you use it for cattle or use it for farming or use it as is, just to gather your own your own food on the area without disturbing the land. So that's how it is. It's yeah, we govern our own areas. And
So-
like I said, there's 9 communities that do that.
So is there a borderline there from Mexico to the Atom lands there? Is there a fence? Is there a designated borderline there?
There is a line now that's been upgraded to railroad. Metal piece sticking out or laid across, but
There's
it
no,
reinforced.
There's no border checks or anything on that side.
What?
No border checks or anything.
No.
So you're free to go back and forth in Mexico anywhere you want.
Yeah.
Not like with the fight with the United States.
Yeah. Right now we still have that right, but like I said, they have established a lot of work on putting up gates and everything else that they could lock it up any time now, and it's very very difficult to travel because of the part is the harassment in the United States side. There's no border patrol right there. 3 miles in, 20 miles out, 60 miles out. I've never seen one there. I've never seen one there. You have to have a little camp about 3 miles out, and you go by that, you don't see them either. You see the vehicles way out there further out, running around in the dust in the desert on the reservation, just running around.
So you have a good working what do you call it? Relationship, yeah, with the Mexican government.
Yes, At this time, we have because of where we're at, we have to have that.
So it's just your own tribal government that's the stopping block.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, education or whatever it is, but there's no interest from.
With Mexico, the state of Mexico, do you use sovereignty? Do you?
It's you don't have sovereignty. You have I guess like a homestead or squatter type of thing, because you don't own land.
So basically, you're standing on your himda.
Yeah, that's it. And that's how we've been surviving, is solely on that. Our government is based solely on that. There are urban areas that are urban places like Sonoita and Piñasco. They do elections there because they're urbanized. But as far as the communities on the outside, the Autumn communities, they still adhere to traditional. Once you put in there, you're there for life, or until you're unable to manage.
All right. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now we have Kat from Derechos Humanos.
Hi, my name is Kat Rodriguez. I am the program director of Coalición de Derechos Humanos, which is based here in Tucson. We were established in 1993 as a project specifically to focus on the documentation of abuses, mostly by law enforcement. In the beginning, it was aimed at Border Patrol, but since the evolution of Arizona has gone as it's gone, we've expanded, and most of our complaints right now come out of police complaints, interactions with people. So we document abuses. We do know your rights training. We teach people what their rights are when they're confronted with law enforcement, whether it's the police, the Border Patrol, the sheriff, what you can do, what you shouldn't do, what your options are. We have trained a group of women in the community called Promotoras de Derechos Humanos, human rights promoters that go out within the community and train people and ask those people to train their families and teach each other so that the information is in the community and doesn't belong, at a hierarchical level. Right now, I think everybody knows that Arizona has a reputation of being the most anti-immigrant, anti-Mexican state in the country, and we're known that way internationally, unfortunately. But this isn't new to Arizona. Vigilante behavior is not new. The Minutemen were just a renewal or sort of an expansion of things that we've seen since before the 70s of people abusing migrants, abusing people who are crossing the border, even though that has been a natural human phenomena since time immemorial. And unfortunately, it's been criminalized. And I think the criminalization of migration is probably one of the worst things that has happened, especially in the southern border, of people not understanding that migration is our basic human condition. It is what we do, what we as humans have always done. And many of us in Arizona are transplants, or we migrated from other states, but we don't recognize that that's the same phenomena. We are seeing right now in the community a lot of fear from people who have switched their patterns about going to work, about going to school. I met a couple once who both worked in the same company, worked the same shift, but they went to work in separate cars. One went in the family car, and the other went carpooled with a friend. And I asked them, why would you do that? And they said, in case we get picked up, at least our kids would have one parent. And this is the level of abuse that people are suffering, where people are having to plan even everyday little minute things. We're looking at an attack on education, ethnic studies, education in the schools. We're looking at an attack on our children, on our future, with this now renewed discussion about birthright citizenship, which is an issue that has come up repeatedly and has been very clearly decided who a citizen is, and what it means to be born in this land. So we're looking at not just a strategic attack on people who are here, but an attack on their children, an attack on our future. And really, the eye on the prize for us many times is the legislation, because just like a wall, once legislation is put into place, it can take generations to dismantle and to take them down. Our educational efforts, which we do in different, we have kind of two faces. We're sort of the group that does the protests and the marches and the vigils and are considered extremely radically left, which we would argue we're not left. It's that everybody's moved right, because we've stood where we've stood always, from a framework of human rights on an international perspective. But education about militarization of the border and what that means. And it is not just an effect on human rights that are violated, because we've seen that extensively, but also the indigenous rights of people and also the environment. And in 2003, we formed a coalition called the Coalition to Bring Down the Walls, which was an alliance between human rights, indigenous rights, and environmental rights groups. And we did lots of things that pushed back until the Real ID Act came along and pretty much negated anything that communities could do, because the secretary could sign, could invoke Section 102 and say, in the interest of Homeland Security, I'm waiving all of these laws. And I think the rule of law is something that is an endangered element in our communities, because there is no law. They get to change the rules. They get to change everything on us whenever they want, and basically take our power away. We also do a lot of work around documenting the people that are dying on the border, or at least the people whose remains have been recovered. And we have expanded that because of a huge number of calls that we get. We also deal with missing person cases. So Pima County is where the majority of people remains who are recovered. And we don't say bodies anymore, because in Arizona, between the elements and the animals, you're not finding bodies, you're finding remains. And that's a really awful thing to say, but it's because it's how awful things are right now. But we've actually, we work with the medical examiner's office from Pima County, which is where the majority of remains are recovered. It's where the majority of crossings are happening. It's where the majority of apprehensions are taking place. And that is specifically where the Tohono O'odham Nation lies. And a large number of people are being recovered on the nation, either apprehended or remains being recovered. So we've documented using medical examiner data the number of people that have died on the border, or at least whose remains have been recovered. And to date, since 2000, we've documented more than 2,000 men, women, and children whose remains have been recovered just in Arizona. We're not talking about any of the other border states, of which we know there are many. And the other issue that's not really talked about are the people that die in Mexican territory because they don't make it to the border. They don't even make it across. Many of them are having to cross much further and further south, and the journey begins 70 miles south of the border. Once you cross it, you're talking about another 70 miles. And so many of them die. And why this is really an indigenous issue is that many of the people, I would say the majority of them, are indigenous people, are people from indigenous communities who've left. We've had huge increases in numbers of people from Guatemala, from Oaxaca, from Chiapas, from indigenously based communities where Spanish is not their first language and their way of life was completely agriculturally based or indigenously based in what their communities have always done. And that also brings us with other issues when we're dealing with missing people. So we'll get a call from someone saying, my brother was crossing 2 weeks ago. He was supposed to have arrived 10 days ago, and we haven't heard from him. Nobody's heard from him. Somebody in the group said he got sick and was left behind, or the coyote decided to leave them. So we do a whole intake process and have actually had to get to the level of asking people, what were your brother's teeth like? And when he smiled at you, could you see metal and could you see gaps? And when he laughed and his mouth was open, were there teeth missing? I mean, you have to actually describe people teeth because horribly enough, dental is the best way to identify people. And that has caused a lot of issues as far as language. I was interviewing a group of families from Guatemala yesterday who were missing 4 individuals, 3 of them who were traveling together. And the Border Patrol arrived and everybody scattered, and these guys have never shown up since. Nobody knows what happened to them. And in interviewing one of the men's wives, it was a struggle because Spanish was not her first language, and she really didn't understand some of the words that I was using about teeth or about birthmarks, about scars, and this is why some people like to say, oh well, it's just migrants are just illegal immigrants and who cares and they're breaking the law. But this is also an indigenous issue because of who is being displaced. And I think a lot of attention is often put on the right to migrate, but we don't often talk about the right to for people not to migrate, the right of people to be able to stay in their home communities and not be forced out by trade policies, not be forced out by economic policies or hunger or starvation or devastation or violence. And it's really a structural violence that's being played out on a global level because for all that we like to think that everybody wants to come to the U.S., people are doing this. This is a phenomenon we're seeing on an international level. And I think that if the best way is really to come at it from an international perspective, that this is an international phenomena and people have a right to be able to survive in their home communities. Unfortunately, that's really not the case for a lot of people, and they're basically bent to the will of corporations or a government that has negotiated in their name and decided what was best for them. So these are some of the frustrating things that we're seeing, and the fear, unfortunately, has taken over the dialogue. I refuse to call immigration a problem because I don't think it's a problem. I think it's an issue. It's an issue that we have not dealt with. It's an issue that every country in the world deals with, the inflow and outflow of people and workers and trade. And we have basically not dealt with it appropriately, and we've resulted in all of the effects, which are the division and the xenophobia and the hatred and the death. And I think that really it should really be a call to us. What does it say about us when we have to create policies to deal with death? In Pima County, the rule or the law that's in place for unidentified remains that's been enforced since 2006 is that if an individual is not identified and you get to a point where there's no leads, no phone number to call, no markers, there's nowhere else to go, basically a dead end, that individual is turned over for cremation. And 2 inches of their bone is extracted for DNA purposes to hopefully ID them later, and they're cremated and put into the pauper cemetery. When you consider that many of these people are indigenous, and indigenous cremation is not an indigenous way of doing things. It's not the way our people have done things, and it's not the way that we would choose to do them. It brings the issue of violating people's rights. Even the dead should have rights, and the families of the dead should be able to take home what was left of their brother or their mother or their sister, not an urn with ashes. And I think that's it's not necessarily always addressed. Pima County has chosen to do that because not all the counties do. Yuma County refuses to do cremation. They only bury because they fear litigation. Cochise County pretty much buries, but they have lower numbers. Pima County is completely overwhelmed. All of the people crossing have been funneled into Arizona, so this is not by mistake, as much as the government likes to act with surprise of like, wow, why are people crossing here? Well, they're crossing because you militarized zones to the east and the west and you funneled people into the desert. It is not by accident that people are crossing where they're crossing, and it is not by accident that they are dying, where they're dying, and how they're dying. This is an intentional, premeditated policy that was put into place, so our government factored death into its strategy to control the border. And they don't care because they're mostly indigenous people. And indigenous people in another country who are dead and unnamed, they have no voice. Who's going to advocate for them? Your families don't even know where they are. You know, we've had people that have called us up looking for relatives who've been missing for 10 years, and they are still looking, which I think everybody in this room would probably still look for a brother or a sister. Probably for the rest of your life, you'd be looking, right? Looking for your sibling. So this is a really, it's a human rights crisis, and we don't say that in this sort of flippant activist way where it's a human rights crisis. We really mean it. This is a human rights crisis where, you know, thousands of people have died, and every year at least 200 remains are recovered just in Arizona. And not everybody died this year. Some of them are skeletal remains that died between 1 and 3 years ago. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous what is happening here on the border, and nobody knows about it. And those that do know within the government, they don't care. I mean, I don't know what else to say. When they don't act on it, the only conclusion I can draw is that they don't care, because they don't address it, they don't change the laws, they don't recognize who the individuals are, and they allow things to happen, such as cremation, because of money issues, because of space issues. And that's not to demonize Pima County. They have to do it for resources. It costs $1,800 to bury somebody, and it costs $475 to cremate. So no one's around to claim them, and that's the way it has to be. But what does that say about us as a society, where we have, you know, had to price out death in such a horrible, horrible way? So I think that I want to stop there, because I wanted the focus of what I said to be about the deaths, to be about the missing people, to recognize that migrant, really, in Arizona, migrant means indigenous, because that's really who's mostly crossing. Many times that's who's dying. And at least for us, we desperately try not to forget that and to recognize that and to scream out about what's happening as often as we can. But, you know, it doesn't add any weight when you say they're indigenous people, because indigenous issues don't have the weight or the respect that they really should, not just on a national level, but on an international level. And I want to just give my appreciation for the other panelists, because I've learned a lot from it, but it's also really depressing to hear that this is like all the way down and all the way up and all the way across, and it's a struggle that I wish I had more faith that we were going to win. So on that depressing note, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Yes, we have a lot of problems with. I had a question. Somebody had a question.
He says he'll go after you.
We're dealing with these issues: bad government policies, legislation. And one of the ideas that we had in terms of the Roundtable Symposium is to combine the nonprofit organizations with tribal government officials. And 2-3 months ago, we started inviting people from the tribal governments to participate in this roundtable. There were some lukewarm acceptance to some degree. Others did agree to be here, but then time got closer. They decided they couldn't make it, and they reasons were the NCAI meeting. Where's it held, Shannon? In Albuquerque or Nevada? Where's it? Albuquerque. That was one of the main reasons they didn't come. Others said it's not our issue. Others gave other excuses. But the main ones that we invited were the Tohono O'odham. They never responded. The Pascoyaqui, they said they were going to be out of town. The Cocopa agreed to come, but just yesterday they called and said we can't make it. The Hopi tribe also, we're going to be sending a couple of elected officials, but also decided that they can't come. The Gila River, tribal officials, Salt River, all these tribes that have at least, I would think, an interest in border issues because we all have relatives in Mexico. And it's something that we need to address, not only from the perspective of the Yaquis, but also from every tribal community in the southern border that have relatives in Mexico. And that is the primary reason why the Indigenous Alliance Without Border got started back in 1997, because the Cocopa were here, the Tohono O'odham, the Yaquis, the Kickapoo, and Kishan. They all were interested in the issue of border crossing. They all were interested in the rights of mobility and passage, because the southern border indigenous communities do not have any rights. We don't have the rights of mobility and passage. The only tribe on this side of the border of the United States are the Kickapoo from Eagle Pass, Texas, that have been given the right to use their tribal ID card to cross and recross the border at any time. They also have the right to work in Eagle Pass. The other indigenous communities that have that right are indigenous communities from the northern border, the Onondaga, to the people that fall under the Jay Treaty, the Treaty of Ghent. But I understand some indigenous communities in Canada do not use that Jay Treaty. For example, like the Mohawk, the traditional Mohawks, they don't even acknowledge the Jay Treaty. But there are other indigenous communities in Canada that do. But at the same time, people from Canada can cross the border and work here in the United States without permit. But if you're coming from Mexico or from any other country from the southern area, from South America, Central America, they need to have a permit to work. They have to have a passport to cross the border. So the idea of us developing and promoting rights of mobility and passage is to be able to use some of the domestic policies that are already in place here in the United States that we could use. In 1996, the Department of Justice called the Alianza Indigena Sin Frontera, and they said, Jose, we're gonna have a meeting in Gila River unfortunately, we can't invite you because you're not a federal indigenous program or federal government program. But I want you to be aware that we are going to be working on guidelines to establish a relationship with the southern border tribes. And we would like you to work with us on that. But first, we're going to have to meet with tribal government officials. So unless you can get a tribal, either your tribe or one of the tribe to invite the Alianza to participate in this, then that will be okay. But I tried to get my tribe to do that, and they said okay, but never invited me. So, but the point is that in 1997, in 1998, they did develop guidelines that were used based on a process that the Yaqui community of South Tucson started back in 1973. And that's where I got involved with border crossing issues of indigenous people back in 1993, that we worked with border officials and allowing our ceremonial participants to cross the border without documents. And it's a policy that has been in the books for many, many years. It's just not being advertised or used a lot. But in 1973, it was easy because the Yaquis were now recognized as American Indians. The Yaquis were not organized as a tribal government. The Yaquis became American Indians in 1978. And that's when my problem started with bringing in people from Rio Yaqui, actually, because then the government-to-government agreement that was established by President Nixon a while back gave the Pascua Yaqui tribe that authority to negotiate with their own government, or with the federal government, I should say. So that became an issue for me because then they said, who is this guy, Jose Matos, trying to bring in people from Mexico? Well, traditional speaking, I, as a traditional leader of the Yaqui ceremonies, I have that authority as a Yaqui traditional leader to invite people from Mexico that we need, to invite them and allow them to participate in our ceremonies. But as far as the federal government is concerned, they don't recognize traditional leaders. They only recognize elected officials that were created by them, by the federal government. So that is one of the things that I'm trying to promote, is that we as traditional leaders should be recognized by government officials, especially when we are bringing people in from Mexico to participate in ceremonies. We need to have our people from Mexico because, the one, they can help us with our language situation. A lot of the Yaquis youth today in this community are monolingual, where before we were trilingual. We spoke the Spanish language and Yaqui and sometimes English. But the point is, now we only speak one language, and that is English. The good thing is that a lot of other youth are participating in ceremonies, but they don't understand when we do and conduct our ceremonies in Yaqui. They don't understand what we're talking about. And so we are trying to promote our language. We're trying to maintain what we have in our ceremonial practices by involving our relatives from Mexico. Because there's only a handful of us elders right now old people like myself that are involved in ceremonies. Most of them are young and are not really that well versed in what needs to be done and how to do it. Um, but the process of invitation, traditional is still there for us, but what interrupts our process is the laws and policies that one has to go through in order to qualify for a visa, in order to qualify for a permit, and all deals with documentation. And if you don't have a certain document, you're not going to get that visa. If you don't have 2,500 pesos in the bank, you're not going to get that visa. If you don't have a utility bill, you're not going to get that visa. So we're saying, let's negotiate about that. Let's talk about it. And going back to the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and that's why I questioned Shannon on how can that be used to protect our rights of religion, to protect our rights of family connection, to protect our rights of language, because all that is written into the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and we're not going to be able to do it if immigration law is going to affect us bringing in our people from Mexico. We're not going to be able to practice our religious beliefs because we may need the elder deer dancer from Mexico or the elder dancer from Mexico to work with us and to be there. We may need the Yaqui layman priest, as we call him, to come and pray for us. So our spiritualness is threatened and our culture is threatened. And so we need to have support from you as individuals, whether you be indigenous, whether you be non-indigenous. We need to come together and work and promote the rights of indigenous people, the human rights, civil rights. And that is one of the basic reasons why I invited this group of panelists here to share that information with you, and the racist attitude that some people have in this country, or a lot of people have in this country regarding immigrants, regarding us as indigenous people. Because we indigenous people, we are faced with a lot of racism, even in our own communities here. Around the world, indigenous people have always been mistreated and continue to be mistreated to this day. The policies of the United States, immigration policies that have been hurting our communities, have been dividing our communities, even in our indigenous communities. Some are for helping the immigrant crossing the reservations, others are against it. So it's been that situation, and we need to be able to work together on changing some of those policies. And that's been one of the things that we have been advocating for the last 20 years, is making changes in the immigration laws and addressing some of the issues dealing with Border Patrol. But when 9/11 hit, everything changed for everybody, especially the federal government. They became more restrictive and more suspicious of people coming in from the southern border, and that created more and more problems for us as indigenous people. So we will start promoting and working on developing a strategy on how to promote guidelines for the rights of mobility and passage. But at the same time, we're going to be working with each one of these individuals here, we, the Alianza Indigena Sin Frontera, the Indigenous Alliance Without Borders, will be working with our community partners in promoting human rights and civil rights. So if you have any questions right now for any of our panelists, myself or anyone here regarding what they talked about, or anything you want to share with us, feel free. We have a few more minutes, to either have any final comments from the panel or any questions from out there.
Yeah, this wasn't really a question, but more just a thank you, because as you know, when we've been listening throughout the country about issues about Arizona, indigenous issues are usually not at the fore, and so I think this is a very necessary discussion, because again, in my own experience, I found that all the Arizona experts don't live in Arizona. So anyway, I really want to thank everybody for participating and giving us your words. Thank you,
Roberto. Dennis.
Yeah, I forgot to mention when I was speaking on the sacred sites. Right now, we heard on the radio, which is a tribal KOHN radio station, that they were going to start in the schools and start teaching the youth not to talk about sacred sites, not to bring anything up about Baba Kiri Mountain, because they're going to work their way into feeding this into the youth to develop it, to commercialize it. And that's very disturbing at this point, because now the youth are going to start moving that direction. Right? They're gonna dictate. They're gonna start to keep it quiet, like a silent thing, not to be talked about. And they mentioned that in the radio, to start bringing it in the schools, to use the schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's what you call dictators.
Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Joaquin. I am an Akimel author from Gila River, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on what I had heard here this morning. Thank you very much for opening up this talks for all of us here that made our way here. My husband and I gave Ernest a ride back down here, and myself and our families, we represent a independent traditional council that more likely caters to the traditional and spiritual voice of First Nation peoples. And first of all, I wanted to acknowledge that what I hear and what I've seen, it's good, because it started at the very end of the table with Sister there, acknowledging that a healing has to begin. That healing has to begin in acknowledging and recognizing the effects that it has on our generations. And then also down the line, brother there, Shannon, speaking about the work he does in the, what is it called? In United Nations, thank you. Because I look at that as a reflection of implementing, so-calling, putting our foot in the door, as acknowledging the structure. It was asked earlier, how do we utilize that? And I think that goes back to each individual as a cultural and a spiritual awakening, such as Brother shared here, and acknowledging where our alliance is, where our true spirit comes from, and never letting go of that. That's an inherent birthright. And I look at that as implementing, putting our foot in the door, and anything is possible if we remember who we are and putting that prayer and faith forward. Creator put us here for a purpose in each place and lands on this planet. And then third of all, Elder there, you know, making his us aware of the ongoings of the traditional council and authority. To this date, our people have lost that authority. We've lost that because we've been subdued, and we've been also taught that we have to be passive in how we look at ourselves. And then fourth of all, sister there, recognizing the victims, the tragic outcome of what hatred and bitterness can do to our people. And then I wanted to kind of go over how I understand this system in as far as how what we're up against in making this work as individuals. It might not be done in our lifetime, but we certainly have children, like brother had mentioned in the high schools there. And the only thing that I can suggest is that we keep our children close, like Sister said, in a family setting, moving together, teaching that, planting that seed, so to speak, of what we're up against and what their responsibilities are. Whether you call it activism or living that cultural reality, it has to be taught. And that in itself is taught when we keep our families together, when we love them, when we show them and even discipline them and move forward. That's the movement. That's the alliance. And then last of all, acknowledging, you know, I heard a lot of talks and pondering about tribal government. I'm going to tell you this much. I come from Gila River, and yes, that might be so that Gila River adopted the resolution on the United Nations issue. But I can also tell you that it's one thing to adopt it and recognize it, but it's a totally different thing to honor it and stand behind it full-heartedly to protect your people and your area, and that has not been done, both in Gila River and Salt River. So we choose not to work with tribal governments, only because tribal governments were set here for a purpose, and that is to divide and conquer us. Tribal governments are an extension of the web that we've been caught into. Tribal governments are only a offset of a corporation status. And I can tell you this much, this whole system here, this whole propaganda that they put out here, who is free? Are we protecting the freedom of a few, and I'm gonna say it, middle-aged white men in their corporate interest of greed, power, and authority? Who are we protecting? When the tribe backs them in their form of government and totally disregards the voice of the traditional people, disregards people such as Ernest, who is merely trying to occupy his ancestral land, then who are we protecting? They're not protecting our freedom. They're not protecting our way to cross and move forward in what we need to do to be who we are. Just leave us alone, is what we're saying in this traditional form here. They're not protecting our spiritual right to do what we have to do as indigenous people. So with that, I just want to bring forward to you, as far as what I know in my area there, that that the participation is probably never going to be given to you at this round table, because it's been denied to us, where we've had medicine people step forward, where we've had traditional people step forward and say, this is going on, what are you going to do to protect us? I say that we turn around and we charge our own our own tribal government with fraud, exploitation of our own cultural ways. And then we have to ask ourselves, who are we protecting, and who are the real terrorists? Thank you.
see what you need to say. I'll check it after you get through.
I have a question about an issue that's kind of tangential. That's global warming. The Sea of Cortez is going to be raising significantly and not too long. It's going to affect the people and the culture and the the remains of people along the coast in your traditional lands. They don't like to the corporation and their representatives don't like to talk about global warming because, just like the bankers over the last economic crisis, they have a lot to lose, and they always kept saying, "Oh, everything's all right. It's great. We're all getting richer." Well, I didn't get richer, and by the same token, you're not protected down there from global warming. You're going to have a platform, a statement on the way we use our resources to injure your culture. There's a lot of people in the Pacific Islands, indigenous people right now, who are being flooded out every time there's a storm because of global warming. The oceans are rising to heights they haven't been at before, and then when there's a storm, it'll wash through over their villages. And that'll be happening along our coast down there as well. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. That's one of my concerns.
We'd like to make a few suggestions. My sister here was right on top of my own spirit in terms of making it clear that those who are awake in the community of the indigenous should know that the tribal governments represent the Caucasian and use those that they can impact in the internal community as insurgents to attack and to destroy those who are trying to progress as yourselves. The weakness that exists in the broader community and the timidness that exists on the part of those who are on the forefront, on the front lines, exists because there is no continuous connection with the life source within ourselves, with the Great Spirit. Continuous. Every freaking day we got to fight ourselves to get back into ourselves. Therein lies our strength, our continuation. And at the same time, as the Caucasian, under the auspices of the tribe Jews, have made everybody and their mammy sympathetic to them, they have been able to do that by continually every week educating the whole world about what their experience have been. By the same token, if the indigenous re-educate your whole populace every day, every week, house to house, with irrefutable truths about what's happening, the people cannot refute that. And be reminded at the same time, everybody must bow down, not just the medicine man. Everybody must become a medicine man and a medicine woman. Accept responsibility out of that framework, to have the dynamic and the thrust, the impact on the forces of obstruction. If a greater community is gathered to move on the oppositions that exist, then there will be an authority. There was some material that was given to me at one of the last meetings that spoke about self-empowerment. There can be no self-empowerment without us bowing down and reconnecting with the life source. We can talk until our heads turn green, but if we don't connect inside, there would be no strength to continue. There would be no reinforcement in us to face the unrefutable odds. We got to re-educate out of our own individual experience as an entity, as a species, and reclaim ourselves and make it known that we're not tribes, but we are one species, as red people. The tribal walls must be broken down. And as the community becomes strong, then those who are internal enemies can be dealt with by the community. And the external enemies won't be no real threat because those inside would be having broken down and crushed. But until the internal enemies are dealt with, then everything's up for grabs. But they cannot be addressed until we take the responsibility to bow down and reconnect with the life source. That's vital. And re-education must take place every day, every week, to enlighten and to school the people as to what's required, what must be done. And we thank you. We thank you, and Godspeed on your endeavor.
I would just like to, my name is Irvin Ramon. I'm from sales. And I would just like to say that I truly agree with the brother that had talked over here earlier about Jose's question. Is regard to the visas that are, they're trying to, have the people use when they go across and to come back into the U.S. I really think that that's BS, because you still, when you go across, you still have a lot of obligations to go through with the people that you're sitting with, and you're trying to explain who you are and your background and everything else. Here, this little visa is supposed to protect you across and bring you back across. Here you sit there maybe 8 hours, 10 hours or so trying to get back into the U.S. I really think that the visas that they're doing, it's not working. It's still a headache. It's still giving people headaches. And the Hecho Autumn from Mexico, that's what they use, but they cannot come into the city. They only can come so far in, but they cannot come in to do like their shopping and whatever else. So I really think that, that we really need to focus on this issue, because it is true and it's happening right now. And there are a lot of people that go across and they get stuck and they have to wait so long just to, find out who they are and their roots, where they came from, where they grew up. And then it goes down to their Social Security, down to their baptismal, and then down to the roots of their father, their mother, their ancestors. It's conspiracy, exactly. And what they do in there in the office when you come in, it's kind of like profiling, it's illegal profiling. And we had friends that went across and they had a hard time coming back into the U.S. And I was angered by that, because we had friends that they started crying at us. They started crying when they were talking with us, and they say, this visa is supposed to protect us coming back, and it didn't work. So I truly agree to what Jose was talking about, the visa. Thank you.
Further comments?
I want to just talk about cultural gestures and government gestures. We have even some of our own people that accept these cultural gestures. And by that I mean we're called to the stage to say a prayer at a big event. We're called to bless a grounds of a McDonald's. We're called to do these cultural gestures by governments and cities and states, but we're not invited to the table to talk about real, true issues that impact us. And those cultural gestures have been going on for a long time. Churches do it, governments do it, agencies do it, schools do it, but there's really no real action to that. If you continue with these cultural gestures, that's all they are. They have no real impact. If we're going to bless a fast food place that still continues to impact indigenous communities to the south because there's thousands of head of cattle that are in traditional lands that are cleared out because cattle need to be grazed, and they ship the meat to the United States, and so on and so forth, and we're just a part of that, and we eat this fast food that continues to increase diabetes and cancers, who knows what else. We're just a part of that. We're a continuation of that colonization and demise of our people. So I want to suggest that those of you that are listening, that are out there, that you stop with these cultural gestures. I'm calling upon you to do that, because if you're not invited to the table to have true discussions, then you're just a continuation of colonization and its impact on people, on our people. And I've seen this so many times, and I'm frustrated with it. And with regards to what our sister mentioned, she's right, that if a nation signs a declaration and passes it, whether it's the United States or Gila River or Salt River, but are not implementing it, then it's just sitting there. It's not really doing any good. Our hope is that they implement that. And what we're seeing is throughout the nations is people wanting to implement those articles, along with whatever other treaties and articles and agreements that they have. So she's right, that's important. And it was my failure to mention that you can sign a declaration, you can sign a resolution, you can adopt these laws, but if they're not enacted on, then it's just a continuation of saying, see, we made a cultural gesture. We did something significant, but we're not implementing it. And that's what the United States is attempting to do, is they'll sign the declaration, my guess is, but there's no implementation in it. That's a cultural gesture. Just like apologizing to the millions of indigenous peoples that were killed or murdered. So that doesn't work for me.
Julian, any final comments?
Like on the tribal government itself that has been brought up, and what I have mentioned before is one of the things that I believe could be worked on. I know we have done it before, re-educate them on the issues of the autumn in Mexico, or re-educate them of the problems that exist right in front of them. As you listen to them when they broadcast their meetings, they're always talking about money. They're always giving yourself money to somebody all the time. They never explain other things. They never come up to say, how about human rights? You never hear human rights in their meetings. Why is it? Is it something that they can't say it? But there's no advocacy from any of the district for human rights that when they do meet. There was one person that was there before, but they sort of got him out in one way or another because he was a different person, not coinciding with their agenda. So we do get people in there that do talk about it, but they immediately find an avenue to get them out. Yeah, that has been that in that way, and I think that's sort of the teachings of the BIA to stand up and be one of the guys that being pulled on a string. They still have those strings there all the time. I see them, I guess they don't. But that's my comment about that we're going to try and correlate or work with the tribe, but after our reorganization, that way. And like I said, we have a lot of things to do yet before we get back in it. And I've been sitting out the tribe since 1999, when I last wrote a proposal to open up the office again since 1996 when they closed it. I wrote a proposal every year up to 1999 when they finally didn't do it anymore because of their mentality of what they're expecting and what not to expect. Thank you.
Sharon, any final comments? Suggestions?
The answer to ending, I'm just kidding. Everything that everyone said is right on point. And there's so many different levels and so many different populations that you can work with. So just do it. I think speaking for our youth, really encourage folks to support youth and to respect them. And they do have a voice and they're getting things done right now. And really ask them how they're doing because they're hurting. But they have the resolve to do it. And I think we just need to understand as a global community, there are so many indigenous issues going on right now. It's embedded in any sector of the world that's going on. So it doesn't take much to find out what's going on in your own community. So I encourage people to do that. Because like Shannon was saying, a lot of the times we're contributing to that and we don't even realize it. So we really need to pay attention to that. Whether you're a school teacher or a parent or somebody who's not indigenous, there's millions of things going on right now that are as atrocious as the genocide that occurred here. So, and supporting folks too who are working in that element is really important. A lot of times we'll come out against a politician or a leader who says something that doesn't flow with us, but we forget to say thank you and support the people who are working. And it's a hard job. So, my students just sent their thank you letters to the 11 teachers who are working on the ethnic studies ban. Because like I said, we all have families and we all have issues we're taking on, and sometimes that can be hard. And a lot of times too, like the young woman that was saying about using all the tools in the toolbox, it's good to hear that. It's good to have forums like this so we can hear people talking about those things, because sometimes I can have my own thoughts and I think maybe I'm the only one, and then you start to lose strength in that. We're like, well, maybe everyone's okay with how things are turning out. So it's important for us to come together like this. So I just encourage everyone to continue doing that. And of course, everyone here and everyone on the panel, they're doing good work, and this is what it takes. So the more people that sign on is very important. And I'm just really thinking about the youth and their involvement and where their place is, and always trying to fight for them to have a voice in what's going on as well. So.
They must be re-educated, to be informed, to be strengthened, because the truth is the only thing that will stamp out the lie and the deception that has been given. The truth is the only thing that will awaken from the sleepness that lies have provided. And the next thing in my conclusion is that rulers will not set themselves down. They have to be set down by the little people. And if the little people do not empower themselves by reconnecting with the life source every day, like we eat every day, and go and use the John every day, we should bow down every day. Thank you.
I just want to echo what Sarah said. I think this is the space that change is really going to come from. I think that we sometimes want to go and get leaders to change laws right now, but I think the hearts and minds of our brothers and sisters are equally colonized. I mean, the education is not there. People in our own communities don't know what's going on. I know I learned a ton just sitting on this panel, and I think that if all the people we know were to hear some of the things that were said, it would change the way we think. And I think we need to shift the way we talk about things, and I think I think it needs to come from us and go up. I think that that's part of our problem is we're still thinking that power's from above and not from below. I think we're conditioned to think that, but creating spaces like here to be able to have these conversations, to have these dialogues, to hear things you wouldn't have heard about, and then being able to share that with people you go back to. And I think that charging each other to go home and talk about what you heard from other people with people who wouldn't have heard it, and encouraging that sort of change and shift in the way we're talking about these things. Because I really don't think I've lost faith in the political system. I've lost it long ago, and even though I continue to vote, I don't do it with heart anymore. It's a sad place to be. But what I do get hard at is at a protest or at a conference, or in movement, in real movement. So I think that we just need to continue to create spaces like that. And until we're so big that we make the rules, and we change things the way we know that they need to be. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the audience? Final comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. I want to say something about immigration. The way I look at immigration is to be an American, you have to have something that they can take. They take our land, they take our culture, they take everything that we have. And that's the only way they can take it until we become Americans. I myself am a native of this land. This is my land. This is all our land. We have these Caucasians that they have their own way of life too. They have the Dutch, they have their own things. The Germans, they have their own things. Everybody has their own way of life. But the immigration comes in to assimilate us all, to be one, so they can take from everybody. They can't leave us and to what we have. We have our land, we have our ways, but that's the way the government does to take things away from us. So, and one more thing, I would like to ask Jan Brewer and Joe Arpaio for their lineage, where they came from. So I can see that and their green card. Oh. Thank you.